Hello and welcome to the Bloodstream Podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media and made possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I am your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I am your healthcare advocate, nonprofit nerd, and your other host, Amy Board, reminding you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
On today's show, we have the CEO of HEMAB, Benny Sorensen, here to talk about their work at HEMAB and in particular, their von Willebrand disease clinical trials that are currently enrolling. Kayla Klein and her mother, Nancy Rodgers, join us for a great personal story. And I have some takeaways from the World Federation of Hemophilia's Comprehensive Care Summit. Yes, I do, Amy. I went all the way to Dubai. I have to tell people about it. And we've got some more advocacy action that is needed. There are potential Medicaid cuts that are looming, and they could affect our community. We will get into that. We have got all of that and more, believe it or not, on this episode. Welcome to Bloodstream.
Listeners, as always, thank you for joining us today. And subscribe if you like what you hear. Subscribe wherever you listen to those podcasts. And of course, follow us on social media. Please, please, please.
I also want to remind you, dear listeners, that the Bloodstream Podcast is made possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Yes, that's right, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can find out all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community. Takeda, Amy Board, believes in a world free of bleeds.
Yes.
And they are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. And you can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. One more time, because bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the Bloodstream Podcast, as always, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda.
Thank you, Takeda. Okay, Patrick, you have to tell me about Dubai. I haven't even heard the skinny.
Well, it was wonderful. I would be skinny if I lived there because it's averages 105 degrees, it seems to be. We were there when it wasn't the hot season, and it was 100 degrees every day. And they were like, yeah, well, you should see the hot season. And I was like, I never will.
It's a full tilt desert there.
You need to be indoors, which is why they have the world's largest mall.
Oh.
They also have the world's largest water park, which, again, if 100 isn't hot where you are, a water park is a great idea.
That's what you want to do.
These pieces were excellent. Vivian and Natalie came. Vivian rode a camel. It was wonderful. But the thing I actually want to talk about, number of takeaways that are of interest, but two pieces I wanted to highlight in particular. One is that we were there to execute a workshop for their youth program, which gathered 20 different people, ages 18 to 35, from, Amy, get this, 20 different people from 19 different countries.
Oh, cool.
And we executed a Beyond Our Blood workshop that was all about marketing for advocacy and how to create valuable video and social media tools to help advocate. And each person was given some homework to take back to their NMO, their national member organization, their local patient organization, wherever they live. But the overall workshop was a success. They have retooled the youth program so that there are multiple touch points across a couple few years and major WFH moments. My hope is that this is the beginning of Believe and Beyond Our Blood's collaboration with the WFH on the youth program. But if this was a one-off, then I'm tremendously pleased with how it went, but mostly impressed by the youth leaders who joined this, and like we say youth leaders, there were 30-something-year-old doctors who were involved. So, we're not talking about children here. But the buy-in was so high, the collaboration was so strong, and even just watching with language barriers, the intentional effort made to communicate with one another, I just found the whole time being with that group so uplifting. And a couple members who I actually spoke to about coming onto the podcast down the road. So I think we'll hear from some of the folks that I met while in Dubai down the road. But I just wanted to give a big shout out to the WFH Youth Program, Clive Smith, who we well know here. He's the chair. He was excellent as always. So big shout out to the youth program. And then the other big highlight, Amy, and for me, this was, I think, the most important thing that occurred for me during the Comprehensive Care Summit. And that was that Sanofi has recommitted to the humanitarian aid program. So in 2015, 10 years ago, Sanofi, in partnership with Sobi, committed 1 billion units of factor over a 10-year period to the WFH humanitarian aid program. There were certain benchmarks, and it was broken into 2 5-year periods, but that's the overall headline. Well, during the CCS in Dubai, contracts were signed. I took a very boring picture of the contracts being signed that commits another 500 million units of factor over the next 5 years to the humanitarian aid program. And it cannot be overstated how these donations save and improve lives for literally thousands of people around the world. Donation of product also helps get product into countries so that eventually over time governments will purchase a certain amount of product, and commercialization of product can slowly begin. With that product, the opportunity to advocate for access and equitable access for all people for whom that product could serve. In other words, once there is treatment product, a whole cascade of opportunity opens up for people living with hemophilia in this case. So I want to give tremendous kudos to the leadership of Sanofi, and of course, as always, to Assad Afar and the leadership of the humanitarian aid program. But without Sanofi and that corporate partner's vision and commitment, this would not be happening. So tremendous kudos to Sanofi for their commitment. And frankly, I would like to see every other company in hemophilia step up to the degree that Sanofi has, because if they did, that many more lives would be saved and enhanced. So huge news, Amy, coming out of the CCS.
And clarify for me, this isn't the World Congress from the World Federation of Hemophilia, correct? This is a different meeting, right?
Correct. So it's about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of the World Congress, which is a bit of a larger stakeholder group. The CCS, the Comprehensive Care Summit, actually took 2 different meetings, a musculoskeletal conference and a second meeting that the WFH used to host, and merged them together. So this Congress is really more about the integrated care inside the clinic, best practices and standards around the world, and the sessions and stakeholders are sort of built around that core idea.
Cool. That was a good update. Thank you, PJL. That was awesome. And bravo to Sanofi. And I must second your plea to our other manufacturers in the space, because it is, without a doubt, life-saving and incredibly important. So bravo, Sanofi. Bravo.
Meanwhile, back here in the States, Amy Board, we've got some more concerning news to be aware of, eh?
Yeah. It's advocacy season, y'all. I think we've got another call to connect with your decision makers in Washington. NBDF put out a notice, I believe it was last week, that the House Energy and Commerce Committee is starting to debate on a budget bill that is looking to cut some spending in Medicaid. As we know in the community, Medicaid is a federal program that is so important to members of our community. I would say about 1 in 4 Americans and about 3 in 10 people living with bleeding disorders utilize the Medicaid program. Without Medicaid, many lower income people living with bleeding disorders could not regularly access medication, treatment, and care coordination that they need to live healthy and productive lives. Congress is looking to cut some federal spending on Medicaid. And it's looking like the debate is going to be around these particular policies. They're looking to reduce how much the federal government pays towards the cost of running the Medicaid program. They're also looking to impose work reporting requirements as a condition for adults to keep their Medicaid coverage. Medicaid work reporting requires a lot of red tape that people have to navigate to get their health coverage. But evidence shows that the vast majority of Medicaid enrollees already work or qualify for an exemption, and cutting off health coverage does not encourage people to stay employed. So we really want that to stay where it is. Both of these policies would cause coverage losses and would threaten access to care for people with high-cost conditions such as hemophilia, von Willebrand's, and other bleeding disorders. So our community members would be at risk for preventable complications, permanent disability, or worse. We're going to put up kind of the paragraph that you can say to call your representatives in the program notes. But NBDF is asking you to please call or email your offices that many of you visited during Washington Days in March. And if you didn't, feel free to call your offices. And again, like we mentioned, when Joanna Gray was with us, you can call the Capitol switchboard at 202-224-3121 and ask them to connect you. And we're going to have the blurb that you can say about particular Medicaid funding, and it means a lot. They listen to everything that we tell them. They mark everything down. So it's very important to make our voices heard, that this program is so important to our community. So let's get on up and do it, bleeding disorders community. We're the best in the biz. Let's do it.
But we got to reclaim that title. And unfortunately, advocacy is a 365, 24/7 kind of thing.
Yep.
Sometimes it requires a little bit more than other times. And this is one of those times it requires a little bit more of us.
Yep. But we're going to give you a paragraph to say. And if you call that switchboard, it takes like less than 5 minutes. Crush it, people. Let's do this.
There's a number and a script, so please make use of it. Thank you, Amy, for running down that information. Let's move now to the interview with Benny Sorensen. So he is the CEO of HEMAB. They're a company that's exploring investigational therapies for von Willebrand's disease, Glanzmann's thrombocythemia, factor VII deficiency, and beyond. As mentioned, just about 2 months ago, they opened up their clinical trial for von Willebrand disease, their Valora Pioneer phase 1/2 clinical trial of HMB-002 for vWD. And as of March 17th, they have dosed their first patient. Meanwhile, they are actively enrolling patients for their Valora Pioneer phase 1/2 clinical trial investigating that agent for von Willebrand disease. So it's a busy time for HEMAB. I heard a lot about Benny Sorensen from some of his colleagues at the company. And I have to say, Amy Board, he lives up to the reputation. I'll leave it at that. Please enjoy this conversation with Benny Sorensen. Bloodstream, I'm joined now by Benny Sorensen, the CEO of HEMAB. We were just discussing how happy he is as a Danish person. No matter where in the world he goes, the joy comes with him. Benny, it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you, Patrick. Thank you. Thank you for taking time to talk to me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. You guys are doing stuff that's of interest. You know, for so many years, von Willebrand disease and other rare bleeding disorders have been in great need of advancements in therapies and care in the way that we've seen for people like me with hemophilia. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let me just give you the opportunity right off the bat to answer the question. So what is HEMAB, and why is that a name that we're now hearing about in the world of bleeding disorders?
So in HEMAB is a biotech company where we are pursuing a vision of reimagine blood clotting therapies at the heart of human resilience. And the reimagine part is really it's deep into our DNA and core. It really translates to a mission of building a company that really is trying to not do what everybody else have been doing, right, but trying to embrace all of those people that lives with a blood clotting disease that may not necessarily have fully enjoyed the biotechnological revolution that we have seen in other areas, like for instance in hemophilia, right? It is remarkable the progress we have made, which is fantastic. But there are people living with Glanzmann's thrombocythemia, with factor VII deficiency, with von Willebrand's disease, as you mentioned, Patrick, that really haven't yet kind of enjoyed that. So the mission of HEMAB is really to be a company exclusively focused on these people and try to really leverage. I say we are living in a biotechnological revolution. There are so many things that actually works now. We can make medicine that does things that we couldn't do 20 years ago. But there's lots of people that really are in need of experiencing that, transformation and revolution. So that is the Uber mission of the company, is really to build the ultimate clotting company, not necessarily a big one, but the last one. The one that really, do the catch-up heat of embracing all those that has been neglected or forgotten.
And we mentioned von Willebrand disease, but then you also mentioned Glanzmann's. We referred to a few other protein deficiencies as well. People like me with hemophilia A historically we're accustomed to a treatment for hemophilia A is available. I can take the treatment for hemophilia A. Now there are some what we're calling novel therapies that can treat hemophilia A or B, and that's a bit of a paradigm shift for us. You're speaking about something, it sounds like this is a singular product that could theoretically treat a number of different bleeding disorders. Are we talking about different products? Can you give me some insights there?
Yeah, Patrick, unfortunately, there's not going to be one drug that can treat everything. So part of the strategic guidance at HEMAP is really to build a portfolio of medicines that individually can target the unique challenges and the unique needs in different kind of bleeding disorders. So no, we are not going to develop one drug and it's going to do everything. Our first drug, HMB-001, can definitely be used for Glanzmann's and factor 7. HMB-002 is a completely different drug that can be used for von Willebrand's disease of any type. And when we start talking about HMB-003, it can do a completely third thing. So that's part of the vision of the company, is not building one that tries to kind of do almost an unrealistic, thing, but really think about every single person, every single unmet need, and then customize a drug to solve the problem.
Wow, that's a very inspiring vision. I saw a headline in maybe the last week or so about a patient being dosed in the vWD program. Can you share the news in a little more detail?
Sure. As you know, we have our first program has advanced from phase 1 to phase 2 in Glanzmann, and our second program now has started a phase 1 trial, not just first in humans, but also first in people living with von Willebrand's disease. It's part of our overarching principle. It's not, really design drugs that early can get investigated together with patients. So yeah, we are super excited about having started that clinical study. Using the best practice of drug development, it's about safety and tolerability, and it's about understand if the drug's doing what it's supposed to do, but understand that very early on, directly in patients with von Willebrand's disease. I can't tell you how it's going yet because it's still early days, but it is of course super helpful that the start of the study is directly into people living with von Willebrand's disease. That will give us the opportunity at least to learn something important very early.
And is that von Willebrand disease clinical trial and program fully enrolled?
So phase 1-2 trials, they kind of enroll cohort by cohort. We are super fortunate that we have been building a lot of collaboration and rapport with patient associations like the von Willebrand's Disease Alliance. We're working closely with the Chess Foundation, National Bleeding Disorder Foundation, and really leveraging that community to generate awareness. And I'm overwhelmed and proud that we have multiple patients lined up. Whether it's fully enrolled, I don't know yet, but we certainly have a significant number of people that have raised their hand and said, we want to participate in the study. And that gives us an opportunity of advancing responsibly, but as quickly as possible.
That makes great sense. For the Glanzmann's thrombosemia trial program, what more specifics can you give us about the current status of that program? Where exactly is it in phase 2? And without getting into an entire, what is phase 2 clinical trials, what do they accomplish? Just what can you tell us about what it is you're currently focusing on at that stage of development?
Yeah. So at phase 2 means that the drug is being administered at multiple dosages. So it's not just like one dose and see what happens, but the people that are included right now in phase 2 are getting dosed every 2 weeks. And we are really, looking at, how efficacious is the drug. So how well is the drug working in preventing bleed events? That I bet from, studies you have either participated in or you have read about in hemophilia, right? You see, if I don't get a preventative treatment, I have X number of bleed events.
Right.
And now that I'm getting a preventative treatment, I have fewer bleed events. We are in that stage of really understanding what's the level of efficacy that we can achieve with this medicine. We are still exploring some different dose levels, which is good practice at this particular stage to kind of find dose levels that works and that are considered safe, well tolerated for people. We are well into this. We have the study is fully enrolled. You asked about that on the other one. That study is fully enrolled. And with the early data we shared here in February, we are really encouraged. We know there's still work to do, but very encouraged by the effect signal. We believe this can be extremely meaningful for these people. So we will do, our best possible job to kind of finalize this part of the trial, so that we can get on to the final pivotal study as soon as absolutely possible.
And so we've spoken now a little bit about the vWD and Glanzmann's thrombosemia specific trials and programs. What about that third program you referenced? Remind me again, where is that?
That's still early stage, and we have not really announced that just yet. But it's another blood clotting kind of drug that's gonna address an unmet need that has been left, ignored. A common denominator, and I can't kind of give you all the details on that one, Patrick. So you apologize for me not answering the question.
Understandable.
But I will say though, a common denominator across the people living with different kind of blood clotting diseases, what we hear is that people are saying we are kind of being forced to normalize what is obviously abnormal. And, we see that in Glanzmann. We see it in particular in von Willebrand's disease. I like this notion of, von Willebrand's disease is really common, but it's also commonly ignored. People are not totally appreciating both the significance and the breadth of the bleeding disorder.
Right.
I bet something that, you're not old, but you're not new either any longer. You will in your life with hemophilia also have experienced that people didn't really understand, 360. What is it living with hemophilia? And we are experiencing that with patients with Glanzmann's, factor 7, with von Willebrand's disease in particular. In particular, these disorders that affect both men and women. The women here have been disproportionately experiencing the disease burden, and I think, unfortunately, proportionally more ignored than the others. So, this kind of normalizing the abnormal is usually, for me, it's kind of a warning signal. There's a job for us to attend to.
Yes.
We really need to kind of address that.
I'm so glad to hear you bring that up, because I actually wanted to call back from, I think, your very first response to one of my questions. You spoke about the mission of the company and referred to resilience. And, resilience is a little bit of I won't call it a trigger word, but it is a hotbed word for me, because I do a segment on this podcast called the I'm Fine segment. And the I'm Fine segment is dedicated at deconstructing and demystifying this concept of wearing the I'm Fine shield. And what does it actually mean when we say that? It probably means we're not fine. What's actually going on? And why aren't we talking about it? You referenced how seeing reduction in an annualized bleed rate, or ABR, a term popularized in hemophilia a couple of decades ago, very helpful to demonstrate the before and after of a therapy. Before the therapy, I had 12 bleeds on average every year. After therapy, I had less than 1. Wow, my ABR went from 12 to 1. That's very meaningful. In hemophilia, because ABRs, for most, have been able to be brought down so low, it's no longer statistically that meaningful if I'm going from 2.1 bleeds a year to 1.4 bleeds a year. That's not a lot of information there. What it has uncovered is where the true burden still exists. And okay, I've reduced the amount of bleeding episodes, but has my anxiety around having a bleed, or the way in which hemophilia will interrupt my life, has that gone down? Has my medicalized trauma been adequately handled? And am I able to move forward in life in a hemophilia-free mindset, a term that's been popularized by colleagues in this space? So I think what I mostly want to reflect to you, Benny, while the von Willebrand disease community is in desperate need of treatment options to lower bleeding, to reduce and eliminate bleeding. That is priority. It's very encouraging for me to hear you talk about burdens in a 360 holistic way, because if all we did was seek to reduce bleeding, we've come up short. And it sounds as though we're in alignment on that.
I cannot agree more. Patrick, by the way, one of the things we have learned in the multiple natural history studies that we have conducted in collaboration with the community, and very much kind of propelled along by the hemophilia treatment centers, despite them being, by the way, way under-resourced. You know, the research coordinators, the nurses there, they have really been a helping hand. And, you know, this kind of going direct and start having communications with patients has been instrumental in understanding what is living with a blood clotting disease. What is it beyond the bleed event? And, you know, you can see across the Glanzman 360, the Factor 7 360, the von Willebrand 360, that now has, by the way, more than 600 patients included, right? To our knowledge, biggest ever natural history only with, you know, the lived experience of von Willebrand's disease.
Fantastic.
And, you know, that these disorders go way beyond the bleed event.
That's right.
You can see that there is a significant psychological impact.
Yes.
Anxiety, depression, the socioeconomic impact. You know, it is socially stigmatizing to living with a bleeding disorder. One thing is what you can see. Another thing that you can't see, but you got to say no to, it's all the times you say no, consciously or unconsciously, is actually a trauma. So I think these are lessons learned. Because I feel like I could continue down this, but so it's a
whole
you know,
topic in and of
as you're
itself.
saying, no, but it is, right? Because you are kind of like, oh, so 50 to 10. Well, that sounds dramatic, but no, it is actually, it's that the fear of your next bleed event,
yes,
which you don't know. You know, the trauma of that is just huge. And I think what we are learning with the natural history studies is, by the way, in the past we couldn't measure. But we live in a new world, electronic medias, like what we're doing right now. We're doing a podcast, right? There are so many new tools at hand where we can collect data that goes beyond. Can you just tell me how many bleed events you had? But
That's
we
right.
can actually, we can dig much deeper, getting a much deeper understanding of what is the impact, what is the lived experience. The lived experience is much beyond the count of the bleed events. Fine, for approval, the regulators is probably going to need that count. But what we are committed to doing is, in collaboration with the community, collect data that goes way beyond that. We owe that. It generates awareness. That is also how we set up innovation for the future. Because as you say, in hemophilia, right, you can't quite quantify any longer the benefit of going from 2.5 to 1.4, because what matters is so much more beyond that number. Now, that change sounds little, but you know, hemophilia still has significant unmet need. There's lots of unmet need. Now the ABR has kind of, you know, probably faded out as a good measure. This is not how we are going to measure the next revolution.
No.
I totally agree with you.
And I don't think we yet have all the best metrics to measure what's meaningful. And I think that's something that we're going to have to be in continued dialogue about, and research is going to have to be in continued dialogue about. But I want to double click. There's so many areas we've dipped into, which is very exciting, Benny. I love a conversation like this where we can just kind of spin on so many different plates on the same time. But I want to double click in particular on, you mentioned the under-resourcing of the Hemophilia Treatment Center network, which we know serves beyond the hemophilia community. It serves the Glanzmann's community. It serves the Factor 7 community. It serves the von Willebrand disease community. Of course, every hemophilia treatment center is unique. Some are better equipped than others to serve a broader, more diverse population, et cetera. Well, we also learned very recently that as part of the cuts currently happening in the U.S. government, that the division, the rare blood division of the Centers for Disease Control has been eliminated. And that will have great impact on our community. I also, however, see this as an opportunity for places like Believe Limited, places like HEMAB, to look at the landscape and say, okay, things are shifting, in some ways not so great. How can we be part of the solution over here? How can we do something to help fortify the community, provide service in areas that maybe aren't, blocking and tackling what we do as drug developers as a biotech company, but absolutely serve our best interest in trying to make sure that this community is safe, durable, and strong. Have you given any thought to, I guess the question is this, Benny, have you given any thought to how the current shifting dynamics in the U.S. may provide you as HEMAB with an additional opportunity to show your support beyond the therapy, so to speak?
Yeah. I'm not sure I see it as opportunity, Patrick, but I see it as responsibility and obligation. I think if things are being taken away, we together, have an obligation to kind of add in. Maybe it's an opportunity to then add in more than there was before, if we can. But it's not something. I really not see opportunity. I see obligation. We have to even collaborate more than we do today. By the way, everything we do is patient-centric in the way if the community we are in constant dialogue with is telling us we're doing the wrong thing, we will change. If the community we are in dialogue with tells us they need support in a certain direction, we will go out of the way to try to provide that support. And if the community we are collaborating with are telling us they need our advocacy, they need our kind of voice to generate awareness, we can contribute. I don't think we will. I don't see. We are not going to take over, and now it's going to be done the HEMAB way. That's not who we are. We will do this in collaboration. And I think can we substitute? I don't know. I think it's a huge loss, and I think it's wrong. But I think that makes me feel then an obligation more than an opportunity, an obligation to really commit, live what we are saying. We want to do this together. We're not here to try to promote clinical trials and, progress and benefit. We are here to provide a voice for the community, generate union amongst the entire bleeding disorder kind of society, if you will. And I think that is our commitment. That is how we have got the ideas about the drugs that we are currently developing. It's not because we sat in a lab and it's like, it is by listening to people. And by the way, that has been is my life mission and journey. I started doing research on my own blood several years ago.
Wow, that's what I wanted to go to next is like, who is Benny? Where did you come from? So you just transitioned us perfectly. You started doing research on your own blood. You have to tell me that story.
No, it's a good story. When I was a medical student, I got really passionate about blood clotting, and I found a professor at the Hemophilia Center in Aarhus in Denmark. He was called Professor Jørgen Ingerslev, and he said, are you interested in blood clotting? He said, I'm deeply passionate, interested in this stuff. There's something magical about blood clotting. I need to learn more. And these textbooks, I read them all. There's got to be more to learn. And he said, you know what? He said, here's the key to the coagulation laboratory. As a rule of thumb, don't ask permission. If you break something, which you probably will do, you can come and ask for forgiveness, but you don't ask permission. There's no one here in the weekends. I expect you want to be here in the weekends. So one of the first things you should learn to do is take blood samples from yourself because you need blood all the time to do experiments. So I was like sitting there, how do you do this? I became pretty good at that. I'm very good at that. So, hey, I know what you go through. You are doing it a lot more than I am. Probably not today, hopefully on a subcutaneous therapy. But I learned to do that. By the way, when you kind of learn blood clotting by doing it, it either scares the hell out of you or you develop a passion that will never go away. I developed a passion that just never went away. And I started spending lots of weekends walking around the coagulation laboratory, asking the question, how do we revolutionize? What's going to be the next big thing in hemophilia? What's going to be the next big thing for von Willebrand's disease? Why are we seeing so many people in the laboratory or in the hemophilia center that we pretty much look at and say, with empathy, sorry, there's not much we can do because we don't really have drug for you. We don't have drug for people with Glanzmann, for Fact 7 deficiency in those days, etc. And I just developed, a commitment and a passion that one day I'm going to play my role in making sure we try to kind of take advantage of the biotechnological revolution for these people.
Wow.
And, hey, fast forward, hemophilia today looks a lot different than it did 25 years ago.
Oh, no doubt.
There's still work to be done, but it looks different today. A lot more opportunity than there was 25 years ago. And now what we are doing with HEMAB is kind of like systematically going through the list of people that, have been left neglected, and then say, let's partner up here. Let's let my passion, see how far it can take us.
Wow.
And I'm super proud of what we have built as a team at HEMAB, and the collaboration is probably the absolute biggest inspiration we have for making progress.
Well, Benny, I'm going to have you back on the podcast because this has been a delight, and I feel like we've only really scratched the surface. But I guess I'll leave us with this. As you think about the road ahead for HEMAB, the various programs, the company as a whole, what's top of mind for you? What challenges are right in front of you right now? And if there's any way in which community who may be listening to this, patients, caregivers, advocates, clinicians, et cetera, can be helpful in a challenge you may be facing, this would be a good time to identify that too. So if you could speak to that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think it all starts by talking. It all starts about sharing the lived experience. Then those of us who have grown up in biotechnology, in clinical academic medicine, we can listen, and we will listen. So if people that are sitting there thinking, is it really right that I live with this much bleeding, or should I question it? You should question it. You should open up. You should share, because then we can listen. And I can bring that into a research laboratory of scientists that have done nothing but making drugs for blood clotting disease. We have cumulatively 100 years of experience in HEMAB. And I promise, if every time we identify a new unmet need, we will design a drug that can address that. So share, because if you share, we can implement and we can do our best. By the way, there are probably problems we will not be able to solve. But our commitment is really we will listen and we will do our utmost best. And I think forward. We can just not be in a more exciting time as we are right now. You're right, Patrick. I'm Danish. I am happy, but I am optimistic. But I think I have good reason to be happy and optimistic. We are really in the middle of a biotechnological revolution where so many technologies actually work. And that means that we have a unique opportunity to make future, really modern preventative treatments for blood clotting disease. And I feel a deep obligation to actually try to kind of live that out.
Well,
I think we are off to a good start with 001, right? We are off to a good start with 002. There's more coming. If people share, we can listen and we can try. And that is our commitment, is really to take the optimistic forward look that, hey, things can get even better, and things can potentially be transformational for some patients. So, hey, that's our commitment. And it's, I think, optimism, by the way, it reminds me of Monsters, Inc. You've seen the cartoon?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so, there's so much more power in laughter than there is in screams. So, optimism is the most powerful you can ever think. That is our commitment at HEMAB, is, passion, perseverance, be working with a high degree of integrity, and I promise we will work smart every single day.
Well, your passion is palpable, and you've gotten me fired up. So I imagine people listening to this are feeling some of those feelings as well. And if you want to know more about the work that HEMAB is up to, simple web address to remember, hemab.com. That's HEMAB.com. There'll be a link in the program notes as well. I've been speaking to Benny Sorensen, their Chief Executive Officer. Benny, what a great conversation. Let's do this again before too long. You're welcome to ping me at any time. If there's something interesting happening at the company that you want to come back to talk about, please do. And if
Awesome.
I see something I want to have you back, I'll do the same.
Awesome. Patrick, appreciate it. Yes, stay in touch. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick, that was fantastic. I am so excited for the vWD community. It's been a long time coming.
It really has been a long time
It
coming.
really has been a long time coming. This is really exciting that there are opportunities on the horizon for von Willebrand's disease.
And obviously today we talked with Benny and talking about Hemab and their trial, but there are other companies that are also actively engaged in clinical trials for von Willebrand disease. So it's not just one company and one investigational agent. There are numerous. So it is a good time in the world of drug discovery when it comes to von Willebrand disease. Heck
yes.
So, but shifting gears a little bit. So our final segment today, it's an interview with Kayla Klein, longtime community member and caregiver who is also a former board member of Save One Life, and her mother, Nancy Rodgers, her mother who never really told her story of what it was like to marry and live with someone who had hemophilia during the blood contamination crisis. And so Kayla thought, maybe Patrick, she'd be willing to talk to you and Amy for the Bloodstream podcast and open up about something that she's never really spoken about, even with me. I thought, okay, wow, that sounds like a reason to get on the mic. And let me tell you, I know I just said this about Benny, but Nancy lives up to the reputation too. I'll tell you, you never know that Nancy wasn't sharing this story because she's excellent. So please enjoy this interview with Kayla Klein and Nancy Rodgers.
The opinions expressed in this interview are solely those of the presenter and not necessarily those of Takeda. Takeda does not guarantee the accuracy or reliability of the information provided therein.
All right, Bloodstream audience, today we're sitting down with a mother and daughter whose lives have been shaped by hemophilia, love, loss, resilience, and the ever-evolving promise of medical innovation. From a small college in Pennsylvania in the early 1980s, to the height of the AIDS crisis, to the modern-day journey of raising a child with severe hemophilia A and an inhibitor, the family's story spans generations of pain, courage, and hope. What began with a young couple in love and a beer fridge full of Factor has grown into a legacy of strength and care that now lives on in Robbie, a child facing hemophilia with the support of a grandmother who has seen it all, a mother who carries forward the lessons and the love of the past. We're honored to welcome Nancy Rodgers and Kayla Klein to Bloodstream to share with us today. Nancy, Kayla, thanks for being here.
Hey.
Hello, thank you.
Well, if we could, Nancy, I'll jump right in with you. So can you take us back to a challenging moment, the moment when you first learned about your husband's diagnosis of AIDS while you are pregnant? What do you remember most about that time looking back?
Yeah, so this is what I remember, and I was hoping that I could remember all the bits and pieces. It's been a long time. We got married in 1982, and about a year and a half after that, I had a first pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage. Shortly after that, about 6 months later, I got pregnant again. And at 5 months pregnant with Kayla, we met with the hemophilia team, and I thought we were meeting about hemophilia. And they said, oh, that's when AIDS started to come around. So that would have been early 85, right? And you probably shouldn't be pregnant. But since you are, we're going to tell you now that you probably shouldn't have intercourse. I'm going to be real blunt. You can edit out what you want.
Go for it.
That there are some risks, right? But and we were questioning, well, does he have AIDS? Doesn't he have AIDS? And at the time, they wouldn't confirm AIDS until you had a opportunistic infection. And we knew at 5 months pregnant with her that he tested positive. And they actually, if I can recall it correctly, they knew which batch of Factor he got it from, but they downplayed it all. Now, 1985, AIDS rapidly, it just went kaboom, right? I'm going to take us back a little bit further from that because there's something I forgot. Before I even got pregnant with Kayla, they were doing a study, and they had asked sexual partners to come in just to have a checkup. And I kept saying to David, why would they check me for hemophilia? I don't carry hemophilia. There's no hemophilia in my family. There was no mention of AIDS at that time. And I remember distinctly them feeling my lymph nodes. I'm going to hold on to that, because feeling my lymph nodes became an obsession with me. And once I had her, so that started. So I'm pregnant with Kayla. I'm teaching school. David was not sick at the time. He would have bleeds, but what they would say is, we don't know what it means to test positive for AIDS. We don't know what it means. We know you shouldn't be having intercourse or unprotected intercourse, but other than that, he seems healthy. So about when I was 7 months pregnant, 6, 7, he started losing weight. He wasn't a big guy to begin with. His heaviest was 135. And he had lost weight. He had lost weight. He had night sweats. And I became obsessed with the list that the hemophilia group had sent out to us of things to look for. And I knew he had every one of them. I'm getting choked up. I'm sorry.
No, no, not a problem at all. Let's give you a break. Let's give you a moment. This is a big topic. Let's go to you, Kayla, for a second. Growing up, it sounds like AIDS was not really openly discussed to shield and protect you. I'm curious to know, as you look back on all of that, how do you reflect on what you did and did not know about your dad's health and the health of your family as a child?
I think, and I've shared this with you as well. It's interesting. I grew up in like the most loving, happy family, and I thought everyone had 3 sets of grandparents, and I thought everyone had an aunt who took care of them as a second mother. I just thought it was one big family, and it was really normal. And it wasn't until I was probably in like middle school or high school that I started to be like, all right, so what happened? Like, my dad had hemophilia, but I never knew the specifics of it. And it actually wasn't until college. Do you remember when I did my thesis on AIDS related stigmas? And that's when I actually got the full story. And I can appreciate not wanting to tell me, as a young child, we have no filter and we can blurt out with that, whatever, and we can share how we feel. And I could see my mom's anxiety around like not wanting to share that with me. So I didn't come home from school one day saying like, oh, by the way, I told, Sally Joe about Daddy David's
Well,
hemophilia and AIDS. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I'll get to mostly the why of that. So anyhow, I knew he had symptoms, but no one would confirm to me. No one would say, yeah, it's not looking good. Like, nobody. So we get to where she's due, and David has a bleed, a hip bleed, and he was in bad shape. But I thought also it was AIDS, right? He had the
Mm.
symptoms. So he couldn't come with me when I first went into labor. My sister went. But then he came in, and they had a special stool for him, and he was able to see the birth and everything and be there. And I remember being obsessed about him eating, and because I figured if he ate and he gained weight, that would mean I was wrong about AIDS. But nobody taught, the professionals did not talk about it. Nurses would come in and go, they took cord blood from Kayla to test her at birth, and they took blood from me. But it was a week before you'd get results, right? So the nurses would come in and go, hey, did you get those results yet? And they didn't come in very much. My doctor was amazing, amazing. In fact, I heard him yell at the nurses and team because people were afraid. They were afraid to come into the room. They were afraid to be around. There was a lot of blood involved, right? And they didn't know about Kayla and I. We didn't know yet. So a week passed, but David was in bad shape, and full-blown AIDS was diagnosed exactly 2 months later. He went to work one day. It was Halloween of 85. She was born August 29th of 85. And he called his dad to come and get him and to take him immediately to the hospital to see Dr. Ragney. And he didn't come home. He had pneumocystis by then. So that's the timeline. I just want to piggyback a little bit, and we'll get to it, I'm sure. It wasn't not talked about because of embarrassment or anything like that. People knew, and people came out of the woodwork to support us, but also there were people who were afraid of us once It was known our family what was going on with David. When David passed and life moved on and I got remarried and we moved to Hampton, it was still the 90s, right? And there was still a lot of stigma around AIDS. And I didn't want Kayla and friends. I wanted her to have friends.
Right. Of course.
Hmm.
Of course. What did you learn about stigma, Kayla, working on that paper in college? And then I'd be curious to hear about the conversation where that led to you and your mom more openly talking about what actually happened.
Yeah, so I interviewed her around the AIDS, the stigma and AIDS. And again, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so it was really an interesting and very cathartic process to go through with this thesis. And I really appreciate that my professor let me do it. But there were different groups that were stigmatized during the AIDS crisis. And and from my mom, her interviews and that I would have with her, and I think we still have this tape somewhere, is it was really the gay community that had reached out to you, right? And I
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then there was, my favorite is, we had this cat growing up named Uno. And didn't someone drop it off was it from church or from
It was the
someone?
wife. I worked in a Catholic school. I had nuns all around me that loved me. And the priest at the church didn't really come around so much, but the Episcopal ministers seemed to adopt us. Like once it was known in the community, we didn't keep it a secret. Like, hey, that would have been way too hard at that time to keep it under wraps. But so this minister and his wife kind of adopted us and they brought us a cat because we needed a cat at that time. I don't know.
That was like our
But
beloved.
anyhow, that
Yeah. So it's interesting how, these stories and these different stigmatized groups, and how, and again, I'm sure there's other stories, but I think in our experience, or my mom's experience, yes, we were stigmatized, but not in a way. We also found a lot, or my mom found a lot
yes,
of support and community, and
yeah,
maybe places where you wouldn't necessarily find it or turn to it, and then places that you would think, like your church or whatever, maybe would be
yeah.
more welcoming. And so it was interesting, right? What I
There was a
remember.
lot. Yeah, there
What
was
do
a
you say?
lot of fear. A lot. 1985. It was, a lot that was unknown. You were living day to day. No, you didn't have the internet, right? You didn't have any. So you just waited for that 6 o'clock news for Dr. Fauci to come on, or the main doctor that was in San Francisco. I lived where, to see those people on and to hear more. And you could tell at the hemophilia center that staff was just, and the infectious disease people, they just didn't know. They were just day to day too.
It's notable to me that David was one of the first men in Western PA with
Hmm.
hemophilia to pass from AIDS.
Hmm.
What's significant about that?
I think he was one of the earliest to get it. And so there was, for he and for I, there was no other couple that we knew of that was in our situation that you could learn from. They did put me in touch with a woman whose husband had died before David, but they didn't have children. Like, we had a child. I was HIV negative. Kayla was HIV negative. Like, no, there was no support group. And in fact, the therapist that I began talking to was the therapist for the gay community. Like they didn't even have there was nobody. They were just kind of out there. And so for David, honestly, by the time that full diagnosis came, he was just so entrenched he was in a lot of pain, he was so sick. And I don't know if Kayla told you, he also became a paraplegic
I'd say that, yeah.
because when they went in to do the spinal tap to see if he had the meningitis that AIDS patients got, they didn't give him his factor, and so he bled into the spinal cord. And so I was looking for someone to talk to go like, hey, how did you navigate this? But he was just trying to live as long as he could.
Wow. Kayla, I think in something that you had written to me, there was a note about your dad's outlook. And the gratitude that he had for what Factor did enable. And the way I interpret it was he had an ability to distance from the unfortunate, unforeseen, unintended consequence of pathogens and had an appreciation for, at least at its core, this thing enabled my life in ways that if I was born 10 years prior, everything would have been different. I'm paraphrasing and putting that in my own words. I'd love for you to speak to your dad's outlook.
Yeah, I've always asked my mom this, and because if you're looking at, innovation and what innovation has brought us, and, even with Robbie, fast forward, what innovation has changed for our family. And I think that's how it came up, because we never really talked about it. But, mom even said, when your dad was on Factor, and again, I'm paraphrasing now, but it gave him a life that like none of us ever thought possible. Like I even never thought Robbie would even be able to play any of the sports that he does or be able to live the life that he does, given what it looked like 8-10 years ago, 5 years ago with him. And I think that was when we connected on that. You're like, oh, your father, he was so grateful for the innovation because it gave him a life that like he never, growing up, never thought was possible.
I actually asked him that when he was very ill. I said, are you sorry that you ever took the Factor, you ever used Factor? He said, no. I said, given that we know what was happening, he said, no. I didn't know him before Factor, right? I knew him in college as a guy in a fraternity. That's how I met him. And he was like president of his fraternity and just a nice, fun guy and, running around campus. He walked with a limp. I only knew him after Factor. So, but I think prior to that, and he had a lot of friends on campus. He was just this really nice guy. And I think prior to that, his high school, his junior, I think that he must have been out of school a lot, missed a lot of school. And so I'm sure he had friends, but I don't know of any high school friends. I never met any high school friends, but tons of college friends.
Well, I can relate in so much as I had an inhibitor growing up, and it meant I missed a lot of school. I wasn't in a lot of activities. I didn't have consistent friendships. And then when I overcame the inhibitor and kind of like Robbie had my own before after moment,
yeah,
life changed dramatically. Medical innovation enabled me in high school, then college, and thereafter to live a much different life than I ever thought possible. But Nancy, for you, to hear about life before Factor and to witness it after for David, and again, putting aside the unfortunate catastrophic reality, but it must have been, I don't know, you tell me, watching Robbie grow up with an inhibitor and then watching medical innovation enable his life in a way unlike ever thought before, just as Kayla described. What was that like for you?
For me or for Kayla?
You, no, for Nancy.
So, yeah, for me, well, when we found out about Robbie's inhibitor and when he had that hip bleed, I actually was crawling in bed with him at the hospital, and that was
Oh,
a
that makes
really
me
hard
cry.
moment for me.
Oh my God.
I mean,
So
he
sad.
was in so much pain. So that
And that
was
was
a
like
really
5
low
years
point.
ago, probably to the day. Probably right. It
Kayla,
was
what
right
makes
before.
you emotional? What makes you emotional to recall that particular event, Kayla?
Because I remember calling her, and I was at work, I think, and I was like, you got to come up." And she was a principal, and so she's like, "Okay," and and I used to be a teacher. Like you can't just get up and leave. You can't work remote when you're a principal or a teacher. And I was like, "You got to come up. You got to come up." And usually Joel and I, we've been very adamant about like doing everything ourselves, like soup to nuts, everything ourselves, port, everything. But like this, and we were impatient all the time. But this one was different.
Yeah,
This one was
yeah.
different, and I think that's why I was like, you gotta come. And so they laid in bed together for like weeks.
I mean, he was in the hospital bed. I would just lay by him and rub his back, but he would moan. I mean, he was in great pain. But then to see him now,
Yeah.
to understand he's this crazy athlete now, and I think like, but
But he was in a
but
wheelchair. In a wheelchair. I mean, he still has his things. Like he still was in We were impatient, just this fall, and things happen. But I think it was that moment. It was like, and I just remember, yeah, it's like we still, the day that lives just on every March. I always
Yes.
text her, and I email one of my nurse friends, and I'm like, hey, do you remember? And everyone's like, how could we forget?
Yeah.
So
And then COVID came
and then it was COVID.
like that. And then the month later, COVID. So it was kind of a crazy year, but it's amazing that the life he lives. I mean, he skates, he's crazy active.
It lights me up to hear that because,
Yeah.
again, growing up with such restriction and pain, what is now available to people at a younger age
Yeah.
to be able to live a more full life, it's just that's the goal, I think, of all this work. And I want to just take a step back. We have about 5 minutes, and I want to say thank you to you both for
Thanks for having us.
just sharing so openly. And this has been really lovely. There's so many threads to the conversation that, with time and opportunity, I'd love to follow up on. But where I'm kind of landing as I'm processing everything that I've learned about your story and how much your family's multi-generational story is kind of emblematic of a lot in the greater community. I think about that need for support, Nancy, that you had when you first learned of the diagnosis. And
Mm-hmm.
I think about what Robbie has been through, and Kayla, even that story, and like the moment of the phone call saying, I need help, I need you,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
need for support. That changes different seasons of life, different
Yeah.
circumstances, different burdens, but the need for support never goes away. And as we think about the community right now and continued medical innovation and funding being a little different, and post COVID, to Nancy's point about crazy old COVID, our post COVID behavior patterns, and maybe we're not as keen to go to meetings anymore. And I do get a little worried that we're not necessarily going to face the next AIDS crisis in hemophilia. I think that would be overstating it. But I do get worried that we don't appreciate enough what this community enables as advocates for access, for emotional and psychological support of our peers, both ways. And I just wonder what that, as we think about Robbie and as we think about, the kids yet to be born, like, what does that bring up for each of you? Maybe Kayla first and then Nancy.
Yeah, the hemophilia community has been such an area of support for us. And as innovation continues to grow and to thrive, and thank goodness for that, right? But I think at the end of the day, we still need that connection. We still need that sense of community and belonging. And maybe things look different, and maybe folks are living a life that they never thought possible, right? Whether it be Daddy David or Robbie or, our families. But I think at the end of the day, we still yearn for that sense of being and belonging. And even like a quick, I always use this like thought partner, like, hey, what do you think about this? Or has this ever happened to you? And I too worry that, things change, but I think at the core of it, if we can still stay connected and still stay true to our roots and still think about what our community went through, 50 years ago through the AIDS crisis, like that should still be that still should be foundational. That should still be a part of us, no matter where we go with innovation. I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Certainly does, and I appreciate that. Nancy, curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for me, and I think it's personal. I mean, maybe there are some people who don't need so much of a community. I know for me, having that one person, her name was Linda, whose husband had passed. Again, they didn't have children, but I didn't have to have so much explaining, or she got me and I got her, and we connected in ways that was my connection. For the one person who totally understood hemophilia and AIDS and being a wife and being a partner, and so I love the fact that Kayla has this community and she's really immersed herself in it. Robbie, I think he I mean, he talks about hemophilia with Kayla, and and he goes to camp every year, and he is very open about it, and and he has lots of friends. So he's found his community, I think, and I think Kayla's found hers, and I'm happy for that. But yeah, it was very isolating as far as hemophilia went and as far as AIDS went, because I kept that under wraps when David passed. Interestingly enough, the psychologist that I saw that also worked with the gay community was the ex-husband of a teacher that I began working with. I worked at a new school, but she didn't know me, but I knew her. And I knew all of that. So I didn't have a community. I only had that one person, that Linda, but that was enough for me.
I think that's such an important point because as you first made the point about Linda, I thought, even asking the question, community can feel like such an overwhelming or oversized thing. It doesn't mean that you have to know everybody's first, middle, and last name that has a bleeding disorder. Linda was your community. You had what you needed at that time. And the way you even just spoke through, like, Robbie has his people and he talks with Kayla about hemophilia and he's busy and he's got social network and support. He has his community too. So every individual's community is different. And sometimes it is just a relationship to one other individual that makes all the difference. So I'm glad you made that point clear. And again, I appreciate that you were willing to come on and chat with us. I feel like we only skimmed the surface in these 30 minutes, but I think that's a good sign and gives us plenty more that we can talk about in the future. So Nancy and Kayla, thanks for sharing your family story.
My mom sharing it. She's never shared it really. And so we were, with us. But I'm like, it's a story to be told. And so thanks, Mom.
You're a natural
both the girls tell me that. And I just, not that I don't want to share it. It's fine. I just, I don't know who would find it interesting. I just think my life is normal.
All right. Well, I'm going to take that as an open invitation to ask you back when I have more questions. Is that a deal?
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Deal. It was nice meeting you.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Benny. Thank you, Kathy. And thank you, Nancy, for joining the Bloodstream podcast today. Thanks, as always, to our presenting sponsor, Takeda, bleedingdisorders.com for more. We literally could not produce this show without your support, and we are grateful for it. All right, Bordeaux, next episode is out May 23rd as we race through 2025. What can listeners expect to hear on that one?
Well, we're going to have a couple interviews for you, but we're also going to have a new gene therapy segment, and I am extremely excited about it because we're going to have a conversation with Professor Hank Greeley and Dr. Margaret Ragney about when does gene therapy make sense, which I think is like the big looming question. When does it make sense in my lifestyle, what I want to do, where the research is really falling. So anyway, it's going to be a fantastic episode. So check us out May 23rd.
Fantastic. Yeah, please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, wherever you listen to your podcasts. This is now available as a video podcast, wherever that is accessible to you as well. And if you haven't already subscribed, you want to do that because you'll have the next episode delivered to you the moment it goes live.
And always email us at mailbag@bloodstream.com. A lot of people have been emailing us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com, which has been so great, which is how we're getting these fantastic interviews. So you can share your story, and also maybe we can put you in some casting ideas for podcasts and other video projects that we do. So please email us always at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com, and you can find us on social media as well.
And with that, that is all for this episode. I am your host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I am your other host, Amy Board.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.